Your emotions are not happening to you. They are happening because of you. What if I told you that every single emotional breakdown you've ever had, every rage, every panic, every spiral into despair, was not triggered by the world around you, but manufactured entirely inside your own mind? That's not an insult. That's actually the most empowering truth you'll ever hear. Because if your emotions are your own creation, then you hold the remote control. Science confirms it. Emotions are predictions, not reactions. Your brain doesn't wait for something to happen and then feel. It pre-generates feelings based on past patterns and then retrofits a cause. Which means the reason you're angry, anxious, or overwhelmed is often a story your brain invented to justify a chemical state it already chose. Most people spend their entire lives being ruled by a system they never bothered to learn. They hand the keys of their life to feelings they didn't choose and cannot explain. The first step to emotional mastery isn't meditation, journaling, or therapy. It's the brutal, raw acknowledgement that you are the author of your emotional experience, not the victim of it. The moment you stop saying "you made me feel this way" is the moment your power begins. The 90-second chemical window, why you stay angry longer than you should. What if your anger, scientifically, only lasts 90 seconds? Neuroanatomist Dr. Jill Bolte-Taylor discovered something that will break your mind. When a trigger hits, a chemical cocktail floods your bloodstream and it fully flushes out of your system in just 90 seconds. 90 seconds. So why do people stay furious for days, weeks, sometimes years? Because they choose to. Every minute beyond that 90-second window, you are actively re-triggering yourself. You're replaying the scene, re-narrating the story, and re-injecting the chemical all over again. You are not the victim of your anger. You are the manufacturer of it. This is the piece nobody talks about. We've built entire cultures around processing emotions that often just mean re-experiencing them on loop. Emotional control isn't suppression. It's understanding the chemical architecture of what you feel and refusing to feed it past its biological expiration date. Most people don't need more emotional processing. They need less emotional re-triggering. The person who masters the 90-second window doesn't become cold. They become precise. They feel fully, act deliberately, and stop carrying yesterday's chemistry into tomorrow's decisions. Emotional suppression is a debt, not a strategy. What if every emotion you've ever pushed down is sitting somewhere in your body right now, collecting interest? Here's what nobody in the productivity space wants to admit. Pushing emotions down works until it catastrophically doesn't. And the longer you suppress, the more violent the explosion when the pressure finally exceeds the container. Research in somatic psychology shows that unexpressed emotional energy doesn't disappear. It gets stored in the nervous system as chronic tension, autoimmune dysfunction, anxiety, and explosive anger. You've seen it. The person who never loses their cool suddenly destroys a relationship over something trivial. The executive who holds everything together at work then screams at their kids over spilled milk. That's not weakness. That's a debt payment due. The antidote isn't emotional indulgence. It's emotional completion. There's a massive difference between wallowing in a feeling and fully processing it. Completion is fast, deliberate, and purposeful. Suppression is slow, invisible, and dangerous. You are not strong for not feeling. You are not disciplined for going numb. Real strength is feeling at full intensity and choosing your response with full clarity. The people who suppress the most often have the least actual control. They're just better at delaying the bill. Identity is the root. Emotion is just the symptom. What if your emotional problems aren't emotional at all? They're an identity crisis in disguise. Here's a pattern that destroys more lives than any single bad habit. People get emotionally triggered not by events, but by threats to the story they tell about themselves. The reason criticism devastates some people and rolls off others isn't sensitivity, it's identity rigidity. If your entire sense of self is built on being the smart one, the successful one, the person who never fails, then any contradiction to that story feels like annihilation. Your brain processes ego threats the same way it processes physical danger. The same neural circuits, the same cortisol cascade, the same fight or flight. This is why high achievers often have the worst emotional regulation, because they've built the tallest identity towers and live in constant fear of collapse. The counterintuitive solution? Build a fluid identity. Not a weak one, a fluid one. One grounded in values and behaviors, not outcomes and titles. When your identity is I am someone who acts with integrity, rather than I am a successful person, you become untriggerable in the ways that matter most. Emotions stop being identity threats and start being information. And information, unlike ego, can be processed, used, and released. The labeling effect, the one psychological trick that cuts emotional intensity in half. What if one single word could cut the power of your most intense emotion by 50% in under 2 seconds? Neuroscientist Matthew Lieberman at UCLA ran studies showing that when you label an emotion with a precise word, not just bad or stressed, but specifically humiliated, resentful, terrified, your prefrontal cortex activates and your amygdala literally quiets down. The brain stops reacting and starts processing. This is called affect labeling, and it's one of the most underused tools in human psychology. Most people experience emotions in a fog. They feel bad or off or overwhelmed. That vagueness keeps them stuck because a vague problem has no solution. Precision creates pathway. When you name it specifically, your brain shifts from survival mode into problem-solving mode. The emotion becomes an object you're observing rather than a storm you're drowning in. The richest emotional vocabularies belong to the most regulated people, not because they feel less, but because they can categorize faster. Build your emotional vocabulary like you build a business skill set. Deliberately, specifically, relentlessly. Every word you add to your emotional lexicon is a new level of control you unlock. Language isn't just how you describe your feelings. Language is literally how you manage them. Emotional mastery is a skill, not a personality trait. What if emotional control isn't something you're born with, and every person you admire for their calm, their composure, their ability to stay sharp under pressure? What if they simply practiced a skill you haven't started learning yet? This might be the most dangerous myth in human development, that some people are just naturally calm and others are just emotional. It disguises a learnable skill as a fixed trait and gives people a permanent excuse to stay exactly where they are. Emotional regulation is a neurological capacity that develops through deliberate practice, the same way a muscle responds to progressive overload. The neuroscience is unambiguous. Through consistent practice, you can literally rewire the density of neural pathways that govern emotional response. You can change your baseline. You can raise your threshold. You can compress the gap between stimulus and response until it becomes a choice instead of a reflex. The athletes, CEOs, and high performers who seem emotionally bulletproof didn't come out that way. They trained, they created reps, they built a practice, often quietly, often without anyone watching. The question isn't whether you can get there. The question is whether you're willing to treat your emotional life with the same rigor and investment you give everything else. If the answer is yes, everything changes. If the answer is no, nothing will. What if the reason your life isn't where you want it to be has nothing to do with your strategy, your skills, or your circumstances, and everything to do with the fact that you are being silently controlled by a system inside you that you've never once examined? What if the anger that made you say things you regret, the anxiety that stopped you from taking the leap, the jealousy that poisoned relationships, the fear that paralyzed you when you needed to move, what if none of it was inevitable? What if all of it was optional? Most people spend their entire lives optimizing the outside, their business, their body, their bank account, and never spend a single deliberate hour understanding how their internal operating system actually works. And then they wonder why the outside keeps collapsing. Today, that changes. Let's start with the hardest truth first. Your emotions are not happening to you. They are happening because of you. Every emotional breakdown, every rage, every spiral, it was not triggered by the world. It was manufactured inside your own mind. That's not an insult. That is the most liberating information you will ever receive. Because if your emotions are your creation, you hold the remote. Science confirms this. Emotions are predictions, not reactions. Your brain doesn't wait for something to happen and then feel. It pre-generates feelings based on past patterns and retrofits a cause. The reason you're angry? Often a story your brain invented to justify a chemical state it already chose. Most people spend their lives being ruled by a system they never once learned. They hand the keys of their entire existence to feelings they didn't choose and cannot explain. Stop saying you made me feel this way. The moment you do, your power begins. Here's something that will restructure how you think about every argument you've ever had. Neurologically, your anger lasts 90 seconds. 90 seconds. When a trigger hits, a chemical flood enters your system, and if you do nothing to re-trigger it, flushes out completely in a minute and a half. So why do people stay furious for days? Because they choose to. Every minute beyond that window, you are actively re-injecting yourself, replaying the scene, re-narrating the story, remanufacturing the chemistry. You are not the victim of your emotions past the 90-second mark. You are the producer of them. This is the piece nobody talks about. Emotional control isn't suppression. It's refusing to feed a fire past its natural burnout point. Master the 90-second window, and you master the most destructive force in your daily life. Now let me tell you about the strategy everyone uses and why it will eventually destroy you. Suppression. Pushing it down. I'm fine. I don't let things bother me. I'm not emotional. That's not strength. That's a debt accumulation strategy. Every suppressed emotion sits in your nervous system collecting interest, and the longer you hold it, the more violent the payment when it finally comes due. You've seen this? The person who never loses their cool, who one day destroys a relationship over something trivial. That's not weakness. That's a balloon that was filled for years finally bursting. The antidote isn't indulgence, it's completion. Feel it fully, deliberately, purposefully, and release it cleanly. Real strength is experiencing emotion at full intensity while choosing your response with full clarity. Suppression delays the bill. Completion cancels it. Here's the one that will sting if you're honest with yourself. Most of your emotional problems aren't emotional problems at all. They're identity crises wearing an emotional disguise. You don't get triggered by events. You get triggered by threats to the story you tell about yourself. If your identity is built on, I am successful, then failure doesn't just sting, it annihilates you. Your brain processes ego threats the same way it processes physical danger. Same neural circuits, same chemical cascade, same survival response. This is why high achievers often have the worst emotional regulation, tallest identity towers, greatest fear of collapse. The solution? Build a fluid identity grounded in values and behaviors, not outcomes and titles. I act with integrity cannot be threatened by a bad quarter. I am successful can be destroyed by a single rejection. Choose your foundation carefully. It determines everything above it. I want to give you the simplest, fastest, most scientifically validated tool for emotional regulation that exists. And almost nobody uses it. Label what you feel. Not bad, not stressed, specifically humiliated, resentful, terrified, ashamed. UCLA neuroscientist Matthew Lieberman proved that precise emotional labeling activates your prefrontal cortex and quiets your amygdala, the survival brain, in real time. One word cuts emotional intensity in half, not metaphorically, neurologically. Vagueness keeps you trapped because a vague problem has no solution. Precision creates a pathway. The moment you name it specifically, the brain shifts from survival mode to problem-solving mode. The emotion becomes something you observe rather than something drowning you. Build your emotional vocabulary like you build every other high-performance skill, deliberately, specifically, relentlessly. Every word you add is a new level of control. And here's the final piece, the one that eliminates every excuse. Emotional mastery is not a personality trait. It is a skill. And skills are built through reps. Every person you've ever admired for their composure, their calm under pressure, their ability to respond instead of react, they didn't come out that way. They trained deliberately, quietly, often without anyone watching. Neuroscience is clear. Through consistent practice, you can rewire the pathways that govern emotional response. You can raise your threshold. You can change your baseline. You can compress the gap between stimulus and response until the gap becomes a choice. The only question that remains is this: are you willing to treat your emotional life with the same seriousness, the same investment, the same relentless commitment you give to everything else? Because if yes, everything you've been struggling with begins to dissolve. And if no, you already know exactly what stays the same. Here is everything you need to carry with you when you leave this room. Your emotions are not your destiny. They are your data. They are information about your past patterns, your current identity, and your unmet needs. They are not orders. You are not obligated to obey them. You learned today that emotions are predictions manufactured by your own mind, not facts handed down by the universe. You learned that anger has a 90-second biological window, and everything beyond that is a choice you are actively making. You learned that suppression is not strength. It is a debt that always collects. You learned that your triggers are identity threats in disguise, and that fluid identities built on values cannot be shaken. You learned that a single precise word can cut emotional chaos in half. And you learned that the composure you admire in others is not a gift they were born with. It is a skill they built and one that is entirely available to you. The person who controls their emotions does not feel less. They feel everything, and then they decide. That is not coldness. That is the highest form of human power. You came here carrying weight. You can leave here carrying a tool. The only question is whether you use it. Thank you genuinely. Not because it's the polite thing to say, but because you chose to be here. You chose to sit with uncomfortable truths instead of comfortable illusions. That single decision already puts you ahead of most people. Go build something with what you now know. Good luck. What if the single biggest obstacle between you and every goal you've ever set wasn't your discipline, wasn't your network, wasn't your resources, but the fact that your own brain is running an operating system you've never once updated? Think about it. You've spent years learning how to make money, build a body, grow a business. But how many hours, just one honest hour, have you spent learning how your emotions actually work? How they get created, how they hijack you, how they quietly sabotage every strategy you build? Here's the brutal math. A single emotional reaction, one moment of uncontrolled rage, one anxiety spiral, one insecurity-driven decision can undo months of the right moves. You don't lose in business because of bad tactics. You lose because of bad psychology. And nobody is teaching you this. What I'm about to show you is not motivation. It's not a mindset quote. It's the actual hidden architecture of how emotions are built inside you, how they control your behavior without your permission, and most importantly, the exact mechanisms you can use to take that control back. Stay with me, because the next few minutes will change how you see every reaction you've had, every relationship you've damaged, and every version of yourself that you know you're capable of becoming. This is the conversation nobody had with you until now.